All right, and welcome everyone to this week's Bizapalooza Chat. I'm Ivana Taylor, your host and the publisher of DIY Marketers and the host of Bizapalooza Chat. Today, we are talking about a really exciting topic. It's all about taking your local business global. And for that, I have a very special guest and expert. It's Diana Ballard. Diana, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Ivana, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so much for welcoming me here to your session today. We'll talk about going global and why that's a great thing, especially for small and medium-sized business.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up because as we were getting to know each other, one of the things that happened just a couple years ago is I was interviewing Riva Lasansky. She is a small business expert. And when I asked her the question of what is like one thing that a small business should be doing in the next couple years, her answer was go global. Just about every business can go global. And she was really adamant about that. You know, and now with the holiday shopping season in full swing and all of us shopping online, tell me a little bit about what you think she meant by that. Why is going global such an opportunity even for a small business?
Well, the US is surely a superpower in business terms the world over, but perhaps we might take that for granted a little. When you think 90% of the world's economic growth is outside the US, why wouldn't you want part of that as your business growth strategy? So I guess the bottom line is export is good for your business, and small to medium-sized companies account for some 98% of US exporters. So really the question is, you know, why wouldn't we want to do that as part of our business growth strategy? And we've just had Black Friday and Cyber Monday. I mean, everyone likes a good bargain the world over, Ivana, and we've borrowed this tradition from the US now, and Black Friday and Cyber Monday are now popular across, well, worldwide now, across Europe, Asia, Russia, Brazil, especially France, for example. So, you know, we're seeing growth commercially across the world, and language doesn't have to be a barrier. Local presence doesn't have to be a barrier. Your digital presence is your face in the world. So it's quite easy to deploy an international presence, even if you don't have big means and budget to do it.
So Diana, I've told everyone that you were the expert in this. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself before the questions start pouring in?
Oh, thank you, Ivana. I've been in localization, globalization, if you will, for the best part of 20 plus years. And I've experienced the pain and the pleasure, both sides of the table, both as a customer needing to localize products. I work for a major Japanese manufacturing company. So it was all about going to market, making it happen, reducing costs, translating, coordinating, deploying electronic products the world over. And then I crossed the border to the vendor side, understanding the pleasures and pains of actually making language happen and deploying language solutions. And I'm now business development leader at Star USA, part of the Star Group. And for those of you who don't know and not familiar with Star Group as a company, we're ranking among the top 6 largest language players in the world, working with many of the world's best loved brands. So we have a lot of stories, a lot of best practices and methods that we can help your audience with today, Ivana.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we have quite a few folks jumping in. One of the things that I'm asking them before we jump into the questions is this holiday shopping spree, right? As I said, we just had Black Friday, and you said that Black Friday and Cyber Monday have gone global. So what's happening across the pond and across the world?
Well, I mean, I'm speaking to you from the United Kingdom. You can tell I'm British, but boy, do I know that Black Friday has landed. You know, the local shopping malls and online TV everywhere. We're hearing about Black Friday, and we can buy. We have bargains. We have Cyber Monday. So, and what's happening here in the UK is also happening worldwide, especially France, Russia, Brazil, and increasingly so. We all love bargains, and running up to Christmas with the pressure on money and budgets, everyone is out for that special buy.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit. I'm asking folks to share what their shopping experiences were, but while they do that, I'm kind of curious about question one is going to launch very shortly in just about a minute here, and I'll tell you when it's out. But the question is, what kinds of small businesses are most likely to benefit from a global presence, right? So what is it that, are some businesses, is it easier for some than others? Like clearly what would you call it? Like a car shop, not so much, right? But food shops and those kinds of things, those might be better off. You know, they might get some real opportunities online.
I firmly believe that any successful company that feels that it's growing, you know, about the right level in the US and is looking to really expand its revenue potential, and if they're very, you know, they have special skills in a niche area with unique value, they should definitely consider exporting. I mean, we know, for example, the US has led the way in advanced manufacturing, and of course, manufacturing industry is a very good example of exporting unique innovation and R&D the world over. So certainly you can take great advantage of that, but not only. We follow the US also in terms of trend setting, style, innovation, brand. There are so many things that the world loves the US for. And so I feel that where companies, small to medium companies, have unique value, then for sure that can be exported the world over.
Excellent. So I'm going to just kind of go through a list while you perhaps throw some of your answers up there. One of the things is, though, definitely food. I've been getting lots of food presents from all over the world, which I really love. The other thing is because it's uncanny how much they can do. Tim Berry is online. I don't know if you know Tim, but he is the founder of Palo Alto Software. It's a market planning software and live plan. And he says it's way easier for businesses that can deliver online, including software and information. Absolutely, right? So if you have any kind of a software as a service, anything that be delivered online, informational content, also really great. But, you know, I'm going to even add things like professional services. Maybe if you are going to get involved in other countries and you need help in the legal area, I'm sure that, you know, you can actually help those folks. Let's say if you're here in the United States and you can reach out to other countries and, you know, be an expert for them. I don't know, anything else come to mind for question number one? What types of businesses?
Well, with a digital presence, Ivana, it means you can be present anywhere, everywhere in the world, doesn't it? So if you have a unique value, service, proposition, information technology, software, service manufacturing, there's no limit, is there, to how much you can extend that through to other areas of the world. So the sky's the limit, essentially.
Excellent. Excellent. Whoops, I forgot the hashtag. Even I forget the hashtag. Even I forget the hashtag. So I'm telling folks that they could join us here online and they could see the video and get some of their questions answered. Let's see. Folks are still answering like why they're here. Jessica Duell is here. She's a super expert in problem solving.
And I think one of the great things, if companies are somewhat unsure about the value of export markets, digital marketing, you know, with digital marketing, you can test the water in overseas market with, you know, relatively low investment to find out if it's the right area, if the countries are right. So that the testing platform does not need to be so heavy from a cost point of view as it might have been previously.
And, you know, Tim brings up a great point. He says, I love what tech has done for African crafts, mostly poor women with new horizons. So it's not just here in the U.S. going global. Maybe let's talk a little bit briefly about folks maybe from other countries selling into the U.S.
Yes, we were chatting before, weren't we, about food? I guess it's that time of year when food is on our minds. And I was saying that, you know, you're going to a supermarket and you're shopping from around the world these days, aren't you? You know, you can buy a bottle of vinegar with Modena and not necessarily know that that's balsamic vinegar or where the place is, but you know that that's the mecca for balsamic vinegar. And so there is a real niche for Americans loving food and culture from around the world for companies to sell into that and to export that know-how and that rich cultural history around food or anything else that happens to be popular.
Well, you're just the perfect segue to question number 2, which has just gone live. And question number 2 is, how is customer experience different from customer satisfaction? I know you've written about this and a lot of other folks have written about this. When it comes to customer experience, we're talking about, well, the overall experience, whereas to me, customer satisfaction may be more process-oriented. I don't know. How does this play into that whole localization conversation?
Well, for me, customer satisfaction is measuring a particular point in time or a particular touch point on the customer journey. And we're always in that restaurant, aren't we, where the waitress will come and say, was everything okay? And your instinctive reaction might be, yes, of course it is. But that's for me a metric and not a meaningful measure. A customer experience is a journey of touch points. We now live in a world where the uninterrupted customer journey is something we have to follow or we lose our customers. And so where does language play into this? Well, if you don't speak to your audience in a consistent language, in a consistent and compelling way that is personal, individualized, you're likely to alienate and distance yourself from the audience. And therefore, no matter how powerful you are in your original version, that might be diluted away in the language translations. So better take care. It's not just the message that matters, it's how it's delivered and how you make sure that that's delivered on a continuous basis.
That's very interesting. So I know I'm writing down what you said. It's not just the message that matters, it's how it's delivered. So you'll have to repeat for those of us like me in the gifted class, right? So where customer satisfaction is a metric, customer experience is a touch point. So the message, are you saying that then the message is actually part of that customer experience much more than the satisfaction, or am I just confused?
No, I mean, people don't always understand the value of language. We all take it for granted. We all speak a language, we all assume. And I think in a US context, we still have this sense that everyone still speaks English, don't they? And so it's very difficult to understand the importance that language plays. And it's not just language, it's the culture that the language and you belong to, and your interpretation of the environment, be it product, be it service, be it brand, be it company. And so unless you really understand those cultural drivers behind your message, you're likely to alienate, not invite your customers in. So I think we're going to talk about this later, Ivana, the importance of personalized individual messaging. Again, language is critical, isn't it? To engage with people in a way that is meaningful to them, you have to understand their language and you have to speak it. So I think that in a US environment context, we don't always understand, and we take that cultural context for granted. And when we speak to other markets and other audiences within other markets, I think we really have to reel it in and ask ourselves some serious questions about, what does it feel to be in this market? What is going to drive me to make these business decisions, these purchase decisions, whatever it is, the call to actions that we want our audience to engage in. And I feel that we have to unlearn and relearn some new skills about language and culture to excel.
I love what Randy Theo says. I know him from a variety of other chats. And one of the things that he says is customer satisfaction is the best possible outcome of customer experience.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that.
Do you like that? That is lovely. That is lovely. And okay, gotcha. Very, very good. All right. What's Jess saying? It's not just the message, it's how it's delivered. Oh, that's what I said that you said. You have to love that.
And I think also customer experience understands the power of empathy and understanding, and how to create a conversation. So we talk a lot about content marketing being about valuable information, but also valuable is how it's delivered and the empathy and connection that you have with your audience.
Exactly. And that brings us to question 3, which is out right now. And that's exactly the point. And I think as I was doing a little bit of reading, and I am by no stretch the expert in this, which is why I'm so glad you're here, where you've got this going on where it's no secret that what we really want is an emotional connection with the brands that we buy from. I know for a fact, I don't even know if this is going to come up in the conversation here, but one of the things is, I don't even know if a website is well designed, if it's speaking to me correctly, if it's addressing what matters to me in a language or using words that I can understand, I don't even think about where they're from.
Yes, that's wonderful, isn't it? It's only the disconnection of language or process that makes you question it. I totally agree.
Exactly. And I think that we're all very much in tune. I don't know if the Europeans are less critical of
No.
language mistakes, or are they equally critical?
Well, I mean, there are urban myths the world over about mistranslations, aren't they? They're an embarrassment that, that's plagued the world for almost decades, I feel, and has given language and translation a bad name. At its best, language translation and localization can enhance your global presence when it's done right. And, when you're talking about a personalized connection, again, language is critical, isn't it? I agree. Emotional connections are formed through linguistic connections, in my opinion. And they encourage misunderstandings and create the loyalty that we want from customers.
Well, Jess Duell, who I love, says, because she has to throw a pin into it. Who says emotional connection matters more? They are intertwined. What do you think about that?
I think so. I mean, I guess we still decide, our initial immediate reaction is an emotional one, and that tends to be the way our brains are wired. But we probably won't act without the practical impulse of common sense that what we're being told makes sense and resonates with us. So the two go hand in hand. But essentially, when we are driving people to make purchasing choices they wouldn't immediately make, you do need that emotional connection through a real conversation. And I always worry about conversations because that it implies, colloquial, conversational tone of voice. And once we go from a formal to an informal conversation, that's when we can have all sorts of trouble with language translations because not everyone speaks the same language. The more informal we become, the more prone to upset as well as enrapture our audience. So we really have to be extremely careful with tone of voice and not confuse conversational language with emotional connectors that help people make good decisions.
Oh my word. So you've just brought something up for me, right? So one of the things that we think about as we're creating marketing content and, content on websites let's talk about, content on websites, conversations on social media. I mean, one of the things that we're always saying is that you need to be conversational, and be friendly or whatever, but you've just said that could lead to all sorts of issues. I think it occurs to me that English as a language, and English is my second language. So as a language, it occurs to me as being much easier to speak, way more difficult to write and be formal with, right? I think the only difficulty with English is you have to learn these idioms, these little, like from the horse's mouth and so on and so forth. I mean, we really struggled with that when we moved here, but this is such an important point that you bring up, this idea of being the conflict between being conversational and connecting and then being professional and being understood. It's safer.
Well, of course, there are different channels and different types of content, and it's not a one size fits all. So I think that's important. On social media, of course, it's inevitable that we're going to be more chatty, and that's maybe perfectly fine. Different cultures work differently, and we need to understand and respect that. So when we create our original content, we need to think about how to create it in a way that's global ready, that can be localized into other languages. And usually the way to do that is through simplicity, through clarity, through a professional informality that hits the mark between formality and conversational language, and most of all allows the translator to really understand what it is that you want to say. Because we all interpret language differently, of course, so we want to avoid people reading between the lines and translating things in the wrong way.
Mm.
And so yes, I think if we can be aware of English as a global starting language, and that we allow the process of translation to happen more easily, because quite often I see when translation goes wrong, it's when you haven't really planned ahead for it. You haven't thought about, how do I write this piece of content in a language that's suitable to be translated?
Mm.
And just asking that question helps the conversation around how you help content creators, how you help authors, and how you hit that right note. So a translator, a localizer, reviewer, etc., can recreate your messaging in a powerfully relevant way.
Mm. And this is almost, boy, you are such a great straight person. You are just moving straight through our questions.
I apologize.
That's awesome. Why would you be apologizing? You're perfect. You're absolutely.
I don't know why we went there, but we started to come about conversational tone of voice, and it's a very delicate thing. So
it's so perfect. It's so perfect because that's question 4, which just launched, and it's talking about what are some ways to connect with customers emotionally in a digital world. And while you answer, I think you sort of talked a little bit about that. So if we are translating content, whether that's an article or whether that's something else, maybe it's instructions or whatever, it really does mean taking a look at the full context. What is this piece of content trying to communicate, right? Because I think where you lose that connection and that emotional, because what an emotional connection is, do they understand me?
Yeah, what is the intention? What is your core intention in writing any piece of content?
Correct. And then I think if you're straight with that, then maybe you're not translating word for word. I was doing in my research, I saw this thing that had, there was, I can't remember the article, but it's probably, I will be posting links here, but one of them said something like, well, it's like, if you use a phrase that's an idiom,
mm-hmm.
which might be, I can't remember the phrase they use, like straight from the horse's mouth is the one I picked. But then if you were translating that to Chinese, you would have to find the equal phrase. Yes. It would not be translated straight from the horse's mouth. It would be like whatever they would say.
Correct. You're always risking, the more idiomatic you become in your language, you always risk that doesn't quite translate, doesn't quite localize, doesn't quite get the same flavor. Exactly. But of course, there will be an equivalent, and it will be rich, but it will have a local relevance that's different, which is interesting. But I feel that you've hit something here by identifying the intention. You're starting to formalize the process on writing content. And small to medium companies have a great advantage in this, because you don't have the huge organization of 1,000 people to keep in line to follow specific methods. If only we can have personas in our mind of the audience that we're wanting to attract or speak to, formalize what kind of language, what kind of terminology that audience will need, the intention behind the piece. This is wonderful instructions for your translation agency or whoever you'll be using to localize the piece, because it provides direction. Just as actors need direction, translators need direction. They need to understand not just the piece that they're producing, but the intentions behind it and the audience that is meant to receive it. So the more insight that you can provide to your translation localization team, the better job they will do, the better methods you will have in place to scale. Because if you nail your intention, you have a document of instructions for one language, you suddenly have a document of instructions for 5, 10, 15, 20. The rules for each language will differ, but the core intention and methodology will be the same. So you have the chance that larger companies do not, controlling your processes at source to be able to scale and be much more successful faster.
I love what D2 Media says to question 4, which is this whole idea of connecting emotionally with customers. I think that what we were talking about is an important component to that. And D2 Media says this is where storytelling comes into play. Telling a compelling and authentic story can be vital to standing out. And I think it's this idea of, you know, we tend to shy away from storytelling, and yet it's the storytelling that is what translates across cultures. I mean, across the entire world, there are only so many stories, right? There's, you know, only like the hero's journey or whatever. There are so many stories.
Yes, and the hero's journey is the same the world over in any language and culture. So that's why it works so well.
Exactly, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the ways in which content can impact the customer experience. I know that we've been talking about that overall, but that's question 5. What are some ways that content can impact a customer experience?
Well, the good news is that when content is relevant insight, let's say content marketing, it becomes, you know, powerful knowledge that empowers customers. That's what we want, right? When it goes wrong, and for example, in translation, if you have a poor translation, no matter how great your content is in its original form, if it's not translated well, it becomes a poor local experience. I sometimes wonder and worry that we think of translation as this automatic button that we can push. And even if we have put great content in, great translated content will come out the other side. And so really it will be nice to really pull in your team who's working on translation as part of your content creation team, as somebody who will be able to enrich your experience as an author, as a company owner, as whoever it is and whatever it is that you do, and enrich your understanding of how you go about developing, designing, producing, writing about your content in an international setting. I think it can be a symbiotic relationship, but I think it tends to go wrong when translation is seen as a commodity and over-the-wall thing that happens at the end of the process. And again, small to medium companies have an advantage here because you don't necessarily have the siloed organization of hundreds and thousands of people who, you know, are not connected in a conversation. You have very easily the possibility of bringing all players to the table for a unified conversation.
That is a fantastic point, right? So I love D2 Media says, well, the reply was, let's see what we said. Your content has to address the emotional needs of customers. And then D2 Media says, especially if you're marketing internationally, consumers in different countries have varying values and cues. And I think that's a very interesting point that they bring up there, right? Because walking that fine line of what may be a value or how it might be stated in one country might be perceived differently in another. Do you have an example of something like that?
Well, for example, in a Japanese context, Ivana, you know, the sense of authority and leadership is important. That the idea of structure is relevant. And yet in a US context, maybe the opposite might be true, where the values of entrepreneurship, etc., are held in high esteem. So you tend to get different business cultures and values operating depending on the culture that you're in. And this is something we can embrace. And when we're offering our products and services, we should be conscious of the idea that, you know, not everything will work everywhere. We might find some of our content, some of our services and products more relevant in some markets. So really, rather than going global and feeling that we can expand anywhere, the trick is to find the right place to market your products where they're most likely to have their success overseas. And that requires some boots on the ground to understand, you know, the potential acceptance of your products and services and go there.
Well, that's a great point because Tim Berry just tweeted, he has a general question. It says time zones. He sells his product all over the world. So the world is open 24 hours. What do we do about the hours we aren't live online? And this is a bigger question than just like, you know, you can outsource it or so on and so forth, because I think I say this later on in the chat, but Pam Didner, whom you probably know, one of the things that she says that I really love about content is that everything is content. right? Your frequently asked questions are
Yeah.
content. Your instructions are content. Everything is content. And to Tim's point, even, the helpline on the chat is content, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But also, we could turn that to our advantage, can't we? Because when half of the world is asleep, the other half is awake and working. So, and we certainly do that in language and translation, because you can have a system established where there's a handover. So where the work needs to be done locally, it's done in local daylight time, and then returned for the following day. Work starts in the US. So yes, we always have the inevitability of a working day, but if we're smart, we can have our production cycles such that we can take advantage of night and day wherever we are in the world. But, I think, yes, it's true. There are some physical realities there. If you want to do business in a particular part of the world that has certain working daytime, then you have to be present during, that working day. So we can't ignore that. But by the same token, we can take advantage of night and day around the world where that makes sense.
Gotcha. All right. So question 6 is out.
Okay.
And question 6 says, what if a small business doesn't really want to adapt globally? What are the risks? So let's take a business that kind of can and has that opportunity, not like a car repair shop.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I said it earlier, Ivana, 90% of the world's economic growth relatively is outside the US. So why wouldn't you want that if your business can take an opportunity of the majority of economic growth? And, small to medium-sized companies account for, I don't know, some 98% of US exporters. Who is that perhaps best suited for? It's as one of the contributors said earlier, Ivani, certainly IT, digital presence now, consulting services, anything where there is expertise that is globally relevant. Certainly that can be offered around the world, as well as the traditional products such as manufacturing, etc., which are the usual sorts of goods that you would normally export.
Exactly. So the risk really is growth, right? I mean, is that really what we're saying? Are we saying, is the risk being left behind? Is the risk, is there a risk with so many of the, how do I say this? We lose a lot of businesses every year, at least here in the United States. It's in the hundreds, thousands, right? And typically what I say is that they're selling the wrong thing to the wrong people. Typically, ultimately, that's what happens. And do you see it as a possibility for folks that are, how do I say, that are in trouble, right? And let's say they've been doing a bunch of things locally and now they're in trouble. And is there an opportunity, does it make sense to kind of go abroad?
Yes, because wherever there is an economy that's not doing great, there's another one that's thriving. And so if you find yourself in an economy that's not doing so great, or you're in a period of your business where you're not seeing the growth that you would need, why not to turn to economies that are doing better in order to profit from their growth? I guess that's it. And you'll always find countries and economies around the world that are thriving when others are not. So it's essentially a safeguard and insurance for keeping your company moving positively and growing by taking advantage of those economies where things are doing better.
I'm going to tweet this out to Tim. I'm curious to hear what he says. That if the thinky were want to add to that.
Right.
Now, that's because I think that this is absolutely. It'd be interesting if he comes back to this. Hopefully he'll see it, right? Because he's on the 24/7 conversation. But I think this is really an interesting point, right? Because if you're, sometimes I think it was Subway of all brands. There was something, and they were doing okay. They weren't doing great, and their answer was to open more stores.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that in a lot of ways, that's kind of interesting, right?
And so I feel there's a kind of natural evolution here that you're strengthening your survival chances by diversifying, not necessarily investing in R&D and innovation, which is costly to you as a company, but in terms of spreading your expertise over more markets and more opportunities. And so you are building a safeguard to create future success. So I feel that, you know, if you're risking more by limiting your opportunities when you have other markets available for you. They may not all work, but at least you have the opportunity when some are in growth to take advantage of those.
I love that. You know what? This was like a big win, big gimme for all of you folks if you're watching this, because that right there, I think that we have it that if we're failing in one space, that we're just failing everywhere. And you may never know. I would definitely want to find a list of businesses. So if you guys know of any that have actually expanded worldwide and succeeded, that would be awesome. So let's go beyond that. What can a small biz do? This is question 7, to be more accessible globally. So what are some like simple things that a small business can do to at least be somewhat accessible to a global audience? You know, you mentioned, is English the default language for what, business?
Yes, I mean, well, in today's world, your digital presence is your face. So I mean, you could consider localizing your web presence, your e-commerce, whatever it is that you do to, you know, promote your existence as a business. And you could think about, you know, some of the best fit markets beyond your own shores that could be available for test marketing. And you could try a few pieces of content and have a go-to-marketing, local marketing campaign and plan that could be modest initially. That would include some local content, some global content, localized content, but would allow you to, you know, make some investigation into other markets to see if that's, you know, going to represent the type of growth that you want and that you can sustain and that you can fulfill. Of course, I mean, you have to make sure that the supply chain, of course, the presence, the actual follow-up to make sure the customer journey works and that you can fulfill. But now with localization and digital presence, it's not so difficult to be present wherever you want to be in the world.
So say a little bit more. You know what? It occurred to me, I've had this question since the very beginning and I've never asked it. And I didn't put it in my chat. What is localization exactly?
Well, if you think of it's really what translation should be, but gets lost. Because today, when somebody considers, you know, a translation, it will be possibly a wrapped up project after the fact, after everyone has signed off on the English for the US market. Somebody might say, okay, let's translate it. And a translation is something that is perhaps more literal. Whereas a localization is something that from the very beginning has been conceived for a global audience or for another audience around the world. It will respond to the local culture, business and market needs of your target audience in that particular country. And therefore it will feel as if it was written and created in the target locale rather than translated from another language in another culture. Does that make sense?
Very much so. So I get it. I've actually posted that up there because I think that's very, very valuable for folks.
And by the way, we all speak our language in our own company. We all have the language in our own family. So I'm not talking about a language of a country. You know, I'm talking about translating your reality or your language for another culture and audience which you want to appeal to. And so those instructions we talked about earlier on, which was understanding your world and the unique value of that, that's what we're translating, and that's localization.
And I think what's really wonderful is that I think Tim Berry brings it up really well. He says, geography is just a construct. The buyer doesn't care where he or she is.
Spot on.
Right, which is exactly it. So we have another question coming up here. in like 30 seconds. And
Okay.
the question is, and this is perfect for what we're talking about, what are global customers looking for from the US? Because, you know, it never ceases to amaze me, Diana,
Mhm.
how whenever I talk to anyone who is not a native of the United States, they
Mhm.
seem to know. Like I said to you, you asked me where I was, and I said, I am in Cleveland, you know, in a little town south of Cleveland, off of Lake Erie. You know, I'm like trying to give you points because sometimes even people in the United States don't know where Cleveland is.
That's too funny.
Right. So the idea is that I have this impression that um, the world knows a lot about the United States, but the United States doesn't know a lot about the world. So what is it that the world is looking for when they are shopping or consuming from a US based organization?
I still feel it's true that we look to the US for innovation, technology innovation. You're still the leaders and acknowledged leaders in that area. So we're looking for that, next step in technology. That is something that outside the US you still have as one of your prime values and lifestyle. Whether it's Coca-Cola, or I'm sorry to say McDonald's, but the world over recognizes certain brands as uniquely American, whether you like that or not. So this sense of lifestyle, of buying into a particular lifestyle or brand, this is also particularly important, I feel.
So you're saying that these bigger US brands, I mean, their brand is so strong that they sort of have earned the right to speak the way they speak,
And,
right?
and therefore some of the English and the language around that is known the world over. So sometimes it's not the right thing to translate, because we know and we love America and we love American language in the way that we do. And so knowing that language locally, even though it might be foreign as a language, becomes part of our vocabulary. So it's American lifestyle largely that we love and we still admire, and that sense of innovation as world leaders is something we look towards.
It's almost like the whole Starbucks thing. They make us try to learn a language also, and I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. But I expect. I mean, I can't say I've worked for a lot of manufacturing organizations where we have global customers, and but our translations and my goodness, this whole idea of localization never even came into play. The closest we got to was having both metric and English systems in the same place.
Wow.
Wow. I'm kind of curious as to what those folks are up to now, but I've just always felt that it was sort of a default that as American companies, we just get to do whatever we want and everyone else just has to comply. And I was just kind of curious if other, are we missing out? Are we missing out, and what are we missing out on? What would the global market want to see? I just find this incredibly overwhelming, right? Selling to the world.
Yes, but many companies, including, the Fortune 500, can routinely localize into 30, 35, 40, 50 languages. But sometimes it's there simply to be present and to be able to do business. Quite often the language and the content is seen, even now, sometimes as an afterthought. And that's why a lot of the bigger companies are not performing well when it comes to customer experience and satisfaction, because we have yet to learn that content and language is as important to the customer experience as the service or product itself. And we've not caught up on that. And that's really tied in with culture. I mean, you mentioned before about, and it's true of British culture too, by the way. We still feel people speak English. We're not necessarily always culturally aware. And so we can be landlocked into a belief system that doesn't mean we can explore the real potential of foreign markets. How do you change that culture? Travel. I mean, people, embrace the world and visit and engage with people outside cultures other than your own. I think that has to be one of the most pleasurable ways that you get to learn about this wonderful world and diversity and people in it. So I guess that beyond the business context, of course.
Makes a lot of sense. So our next question is, and we've kind of talked a little bit about this, you and I here, which is, do you pay attention to where companies are located in the world? And does it impact whether you buy or not?
Maybe interesting question. I think we love native brands that are rich in local culture and that embrace their sense of where they come from. And they can be the strongest brands because we recognize the service and the product as a feature of where it comes from. It might be, you mentioned food, it might have to do with the produce, it might have to do with a long heritage for producing that food or wine or whatever it might be. So, and I think that flavors that with a personality and value. So I think that we could actually use that sense of geography and culture to enrich our messaging.
I love that answer, right? Because one of the things that occurred to me was I was going through my Facebook stream, and I have shared this example with so many people. I'm in my Facebook stream, and I love shopping through Facebook. I can't believe the day has actually come that when I'm bored or when my husband's watching some kind of movie and I am like screen shopping, or I'll be like going through Facebook, and they've gotten so good at targeting that I love the stuff that's in there. And one of the things that I saw was a website, and they said something about, something about 150 steps it takes 150 steps to make these shoes by hand in a little village in Italy, or like something to that effect. It was like these shoes, and they were leather, Italy. So you've got the whole Italian leather shoes thing going on, right? Yes, the company is in Italy. However, everything about that site, and I have no idea what the Italians see or what the Europeans see. I can tell you that when I went to that site, it had all the flavors of Italy. Maybe it was like Pizza Hut, right? It had all the flavors of Italy, but it was very Americanized. All the prices were in dollars. Everything, the language was absolutely perfect. The images were stunning. I mean, it was beautiful. Like, I wanted to buy those shoes. I didn't, of course, because they were like $400.
Wow. Oh, yeah, I think that's best of both worlds, isn't it? We recognize areas of excellence in the world and we want to buy into that. We want to learn. We want to buy Italian shoes, Italian food, whatever it might be. And we want to somehow share in the success of that. It's buying into something bigger than the product or service that we're actually buying. We're buying into a culture of a company, a country, a region that's famous for a particular product, service, whatever it might be. So I think the fact that was merged in a language and a navigation that felt completely home, like home for you, made it trustworthy. And that combination of culture and linguistic assurance is a powerful weapon for globalization.
And it could work against you too, right? Because in those very same Facebook type ads, you have ads for products that are, let's say, clothing, and it looks lovely and everything looks lovely. The models look lovely. Even the site is not too bad. But then it's all coming from China.
Yeah.
And then where it falls flat is it takes too long to get here. I can't communicate with them. When the product shows up, like it's sized for pygmies. My mom had this experience. She wanted to order something. She ordered it. It came. It was on a 2X or X. I don't even know. But it looked like it was for a pygmy. So that's where that falls down. Whereas buying the Italian leather shoes at $450. Now, this was not very expensive, which should have been your first clue. But, those are like two different experiences. One that you are moving towards and one that you're like, God, I hope I don't land on another one of these. Right.
It's by everywhere, and in the digital world, you are trusting the content and the experience that you're having to make purchasing choices. And so it has the power to, please or displease. It's very difficult, but that trust that you have with the content and the experience that's giving you, that's really, really powerful. And it's a shame that it's only in that example, a prestigious $400, $500 brand shoes that could do that, when, it doesn't necessarily need to be the premium end. We can still still give premium content experiences, even if we're not offering luxury products.
See, and D2 Media says sales emails from overseas companies can be suspect unless they're a major brand. You won't know their reputation. And I think that's exactly what I was talking about, right?
Yes.
It's very difficult to establish that trust. And, you know,
it's easier than ever to do business anywhere in the world with a digital presence. It's true. And so, creating that trust, first of all, you have to actually deliver on the promises. There has to be product service integrity. But then you have to really figure out how you're going to relay that content experience in the language that will convince the user that they can trust you. So the content and experience will become as important as the service and product itself.
Exactly. And I think this is where, this is going to be an area where lots of businesses are going to have lots of work to do, because it's more than just, do you have beautiful pictures and is your description grammatically correct? This is where you get through customer satisfaction. Did the process go okay? Yeah, it went okay. Right.
But you mentioned about one of the sites had correct measures, and that was the only attempt they made at translation, let's say. But it's those small things. They're not small, but they're major if they miss. And the likelihood is if you're a slightly disreputable brand, you're less likely to care about those details. But your customers won't. They will call you on it.
Yes.
Exactly. And it's back to the continuous experience. Unless you pay attention to every detail and every touch point, you'll lose your customer immediately, because they'll think of you as they would a brand of a product that might have come out of China or wherever else, that may not be the relevant or fair comment to what you're selling or producing. That's the danger.
So let's talk a little bit more about this localization. What are some ways, this is question 10, what are some ways that you can humanize your brand for local markets? Like in my little shoe example, the Italian shoe example, they really humanized it. They gave me this visual of, and they gave me images of people working by hand, building shoes, and they got a picture of the village. And to me, that was very humanizing. What are some other things that that a brand can do or a small business can do to expand and humanize?
I feel it's going back to what you talked about at the start, Ivana. It's clarifying your intention, clarifying and simplifying your message. Don't think that you, by elaboration and decoration, that adds value. Cutting back sometimes adds more value than takes away, because it simplifies your message to a core, which will localize, or has the chance, let's say, of being localized more effectively. That would be my first point. The second, the customer stories you talked about. I think one of our audience talked about customer stories. They speak to people in a place that goes beyond language. So pulling out those carefully crafted stories and localizing them so that they're still relevant to a local audience, I think that's important. Using graphics, using imagery that doesn't obviously offend, but that responds visually. We all know that we're visual creatures and we respond to visual impulse. So, taking care of the selection of graphics and imagery and making sure that either neutral or that they're appropriate to the countries, markets and cultures that we want to speak with. Those are some of the things that I would be aware that culture is about offending, as well as embracing. And so being aware that idiomatic conversational language needs to be very carefully handled and managed. That not all cultures and languages and countries work the same way. If you're interested in a specific market, find out a little bit about how business is done in that language and culture personally, so it enriches your way of doing business.
That is such a great tip, right? Because I think in my research I saw, well, at least from my previous experience, when you're looking at localization, you're looking at doing this, you think it's like your company and, like you said, 80 other countries, right? But it's really not. You can absolutely just start with a few and make that your project. Now, do you recommend focusing on maybe one or two of your biggest and then making that trip and living and working with the people, or like, what's your recommendation about that? This would be fun for a small business owner, right? Like, oh,
yeah, absolutely. You know, find out the affinity, which markets and countries would be the best fit for your products or services. Investigate, boots on ground, find some people locally who can give you an informed, independent view that you trust. And build across your organization a sense that this market isn't just a commodity, it's a way of growing the business. How do we connect everyone to make it really work in the best way? So in every department that we deliver in an uninterrupted customer journey. And then finally work with a translation partner, in-country team that buys into your company's success and that is part of your team, because don't think of it as an over-the-wall language translation activity that gets done in a hurry before you go to market. Involve those teams early on. Get people to work with you to understand your objectives and translate those. And then when the documents or the content arrives, they'll get it. They will understand your intention, and that's what you want to go to market with.
I think that is such great advice, right? And throw yourself into the culture. This is going to be time intensive, but it's like anything else. It's time that you spend up front that's really going to pay off in the end.
A little upfront, perhaps. It could be a TCON with the team once a week or once a month. Synchronizing. Are we going to market in the right way? Are we combining the right global content with locally relevant content? Is this the right product? Is this the right cluster of languages and markets for what we're doing? And then develop an implementation plan which is phased in its approach, testing with proof of concepts, and gradually it won't be a surprise. You'll be planning to be successful in the market. You'll see the revenues, and suddenly translation and localization opens up market opportunities. I hate for us to be in the business of a commodity. If you're in the business of a commodity, content becomes something by which you're judged. If content becomes an asset, it's something to grow and have a future success in your organization. So embrace it personally, culturally, as a business, because global teams will be stronger teams.
Oh, this is great. So this D2 Media is asking the question, any tips on getting started? So we sort of been talking about that. I'm responding and saying, focus on a single culture, go visit, put boots on the ground. The other question that I had is, does it make sense to hire a local, like if what you're doing is creating content, maybe local content creators? And you can even do that from here using services like Upwork, to say, here's what we have, help us recreate this for your country. What is your advice around that?
You're touching on a subject that, many people refer to as transcreation. So we've had translation, which is, let's say, should be localization, but it's got worn out over the past years. We have localization, which is, culturally relevant content that has been conveyed from one language into another. And now we have transcreation. And this is about taking initial concept and content and saying, great, that worked in a certain culture. How can we recreate that to be relevant for your target market? And there's lots of solutions there. There are PR agencies, there's local content and copywriters, there's translation companies, there's a whole range of expertise out there that can help you recreate the content. I think my advice is, it's not about the content, it's about your product and services and understanding them. So you have to find the right people who get it, who understand what your company offering is and brand, in order to do a proper transcreation or local relevant content, I think. And that depends on what business you're in, what service, what kind of area you're in, as to who you might choose, and also what market as well. It might vary.
That is awesome. Right. So what did you call this concept now again?
Transcreation.
Transcreation.
Yeah. It's just a word. Like any piece of jargon, it's there to be used and abused, Ivana, but it nicely takes the idea that you have an original concept, you take it as the idea, and you play with it and you recreate something new in another language for another culture. Could be the case of a case study or a story. You'll have different stories from around the world, but they'll convey a single idea.
Nice. Nice. That's really fantastic. Well, I cannot thank you enough, Diana, for being here. What a fun conversation. I have learned so much, and I've learned that there's so much more to learn.
Yes, well, we're always learning all the time, Ivana. It was such a pleasure to be on this show with you today. Thank you again for inviting me. It was a great pleasure. Have a great day.
Well, thank you. And there you have it, another session of Bizapalooza Chat with Diana Ballard today, where we talk about localization, transcreation, and taking your small business global. So thanks for watching us, and come back every Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 7 p.m. over across the pond in Britain. Thanks a lot for joining us.